Hello, I'm State Representative Ron Amstutz from the 3rd Ohio House District, which encompasses all of Wayne County. Welcome to Ohio in Focus.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Ohio in Focus, a program that brings state government to you. I'm your host, Dustin Russell. We have with us today State Representative Ron Amstutz, who serves the 3rd Ohio House District, which includes all of Wayne County. Representative Amstutz, thanks for being with us here today.
It's good to be here.
Great. Well, despite your length of service in both houses of the General Assembly, I'm sure everyone in Wayne County may know who you are, but how about a brief background?
Well, I did grow up in Wayne County. It's a great place. I grew up on a dairy farm. I went to school in Wayne County. I served as the mayor of the city of Orrville in the 70s, and then began serving our area in the legislature in 1981, and that's what I'm continuing to do even today.
What inspired you to run for public office to serve the citizens back home?
Well, prior to public service, I was actually a journalist, and my job was largely helping people understand what was going on in government. And my interest in government started really in high school already. So it was a natural progression to say, well, I want to get involved directly and see if I can help make things better. And that's kind of what motivates me, is to try to help work on things. And there's always more problems to solve than we wish there were.
More problems than time in the day.
Yeah.
Well, in the General Assembly, specifically the Ohio House of Representatives, a lot of the work is done not on the floor, which most people see on a day-to-day basis, but in the committee. Could you take a moment and explain to the citizens back in Wayne County what your assignments are generally for this session?
Sure. My main assignment is actually to lead the budget-making process in the Finance and Appropriation Committee. I'm the chairman of that committee. It has 32 members, which is one short of the full size of the Ohio Senate. It's a very large committee. And of course, a lot of jokes about my sense of timing, because we have real budget issues this session. I also serve on the Ways and Means Committee, which does a lot of the tax policy for the state, as well as the Public Utilities Committee.
And the agendas on those three committees are not, or those other two committees are not short, to be sure.
We have a lot going on in this General Assembly, a lot of work to do.
Okay, well, let's get into the meat of this. People want to hear about a lot of the important issues, and this session has already been busy. Unlike others in the past, where we've kind of had a slow start, we've really jumped right into it.
Yes.
Could you take a moment here and discuss for us the process, the legislative process, and any sort of opportunities for the public to be involved in House Bill 153, which is the state operating budget?
Sure. The budget process has several parts. The first part of it involves actually the executive branch, led by the governor, pulling together and recommending what they think the budget for the next 2 years that starts this July 1st should look like. That's the first stage of the process. But now we're entering the second stage of that process, and it's the House of Representatives' responsibility to take the recommended budget and air it in public. So it's a very public process. We're in the process now of understanding what's in the budget, so we're having a lot of the agencies that bring in and explain their portions of the budget. But we will also have soon a lot of public input as well. And that's happening now already as constituents and organizations are contacting the members of the General Assembly to help us understand the impacts and the dynamics in what's been proposed. Now, I need to say that this process started in the House really on the evening of Tuesday, March 15, when the governor had a big town meeting and invited the public, both electronically across the state as well as in person, and the General Assembly to hear his initial unveiling. The next day, we started hearings in our Finance Committee that were designed to begin understanding this bill. We actually got the bill on Tuesday.
This is the budget bill.
This is the budget bill.
How many pages is this thing?
This thing is 3,224 pages. Just for reference, the last budget that was passed, that we're still operating under for another few months, when it was finished, after it went all through the process, was less pages than this. It was 3,118 pages. So this is a very big document, and as we have some explanation of this in our discussion here, it'll help people start to understand why there's extra pages in this budget. It's not about the spending. The spending part is way down towards the back, and there's a lot of billions of dollars there, but most of the budget is actually the policies that drive the budget, that relate to the budget, and there are many, many changes being proposed by the administration. That's why it's so thick. It's, I think, the most expansive set of pages that has been proposed in my experience here, and I've worked on budgets since 1981. So that's a daunting task, but we have a great team that I believe will do a good job of working through this document and making the changes that the House will make before we ship it to the Senate, which will then run through their process of working with both the governor's proposal and the House proposal. And then finally, the process will conclude in June with a meeting of several representatives from the House and the Senate in what's called a conference committee, and I'll chair that committee in June to resolve the final differences and come up with a plan that the governor will then have a chance to veto a few things, but sign the bulk of it and go into action.
So these are double-sided pages.
These are double-sided pages. It's a very big document.
But it is a big and large document. It's an important document, to be sure. Now, we have this document here, and there's all sorts of topics and policy positions and such like this. What are you focusing on in this document?
Well, my job as the chairman of the committee is to manage the process in the House. So we have 5 subcommittees that are already meeting now after we had meetings of the full committee to get general understandings of the big parts of the budget. Now those 5 parts, those 5 subcommittees are having hearings and will continue to have hearings. Then we'll come back together as a full committee. So I'm managing that, but the parts that I'm going to primarily be focused on have to do with cost containments, and there's a reason why we need to be very focused on cost containments that we're going to talk about here today. But I will be looking at the big pieces and how they interact and understanding the impacts on the citizens of Ohio, but all the groups that provide those services to our citizens and how they're being impacted and how they're going to be partnering with us in an effort to produce a budget that we can work with.
So just to step back for a minute there, and we're explaining this document today, which is helpful for people. You mentioned that the governor had a town hall meeting. Do you ever recall a governor going to that length of discussion and detail for people to explain what's in a document like this?
No, it was a very different. Usually there's just a press conference, and the press is the vehicle with some video to put that out to the public, but not in the method that we saw. It was multiple hours of meetings. But even so, it's a very big document, and it takes time to understand it. We don't understand it yet in the House. We're working on that. That's our process, and we're doing it in public to help the public understand what's in it as we learn about it.
We've heard a lot about spending, trends, how we're in this position that we're in now with potential shortfall. I guess the simple question in here for everyone in Wayne County is, how did we get here?
Right. Well, there's been a lot of talk, Dustin, about the $8 billion gap that's developing in the budget, and that needs to be understood. Let me pull up a chart here that I put together that shows trending of our tax revenues in the state and also trending of spending in the state. This chart is helpful because the state a couple of years ago lost over 12% of its tax revenues in one year. Then the next year it lost another 5%. So that's a 17% drop. At the same time that spending was going up, that gap that opened up there was filled with temporary sources of funds. A lot of it was federal money, and some of it had to do with temporary extra federal money for the Medicaid program that we're going to talk a little bit about. And so that's the problem it's an unusual problem. Usually you have trouble balancing the budget, but this is an unusual problem because this money is now gone. It's not available largely. So the new budget that's being proposed starts here. This would be when July 1 comes. And by the way, this high number here is what's authorized for this year that's still playing out. It probably will come in a little bit lower than that, but it's still, you can see that this gap starts to close sharply in the first year and then goes all the way to closure in the second year. That's the governor's proposal at this time, and we will work through the dynamics that are causing these lines to change like that.
Okay, so on this chart, we're talking about fiscal year 11, 12, and 13. For everyone back home, that is the calendar that the state operates on.
Right. You can think of it as school years. We will start the new budget this July and move through the next school year, and then the year after that, which they all start on July 1st. So our budget that we're currently operating on will close at the end of June. That's coming up here.
Okay, and then we'll start fiscal year 12, and then that's
Correct.
where everyone can see these lines starting to come together a little bit.
We work in a 2-year budget frame.
Okay, well, another simple question, I guess. How do we solve this mess? Because your chart here indicates there is a gap between what we have and
Right.
what we don't have.
That's correct. Yeah, there are a series of things that they're all sort of cost containment related, but the first thing that's happening is we are seeing some recovery of our revenues, and that's part of the solution. So the recovery of our tax revenues is showing some improvement now in our economy, and that's part of what's built into this. There's another part of revenue, though, that is actually sharing out to the pain to our local partners. I need to tell you that 85% of our operating budget is transferred out into the communities across Ohio, and so to places like schools and hospitals and nursing homes and colleges and lots of places that provide the services at county levels. So the pain of this budget is being shared. It's proposed to be shared out with them, and part of the revenue increase is not just the natural growth in revenue, but there's some of the revenues that were being shared with our local partners are being pulled in this proposal back to the state level to help balance our budget. So there's going to be a lot of concerns, and I have a lot of concerns about understanding the impacts on our local partners who also have to balance their budgets.
Okay.
Now let me go a little bit
Sure.
further. There's more to there. I'm just going to give you an outline here, but the whole Medicaid program, which is a very large part of the budget for healthcare services, is fast increasing in cost. And so the administration is proposing multiple cost containments to contain the growth in expenditures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that probably, but that is still going up. It's still very costly. In addition, there are reductions in agency spending, and there are prison reforms that are being proposed to try to contain costs in our prison. And then there's a whole series of service and governmental efficiency proposals, policy proposals that are very, very big and expansive that are part of the multiple pages that we just showed people. So that's just a quick outline of what's going on.
What is agency spending?
All right, that's a good question. There are 59 state agencies, everything from the Department of Education to the Board of Regents that puts money out to our colleges and universities. There are a series of departments that do human service healthcare delivery primarily for folks who are either in nursing homes or they qualify because they have very low assets and income, or they may be disabled or developmentally disabled even, and things like that. So that's another major area. Then we have our state prison system, which is very costly and is another big part of the budget, but it includes agencies like the Department of Insurance and the Department of Commerce and the EPA and lots of agencies that aren't actually funded by taxpayer money, but by the fees that are charged by those agencies.
Okay. Let's get back into the area of cost containment. What are the proposed areas of cost containment as you see it?
Well, I've kind of outlined them very generally, but let's go into them a little bit more. When we think about the overall budget, and I think we need to do that a little bit, there appears to be a little bit of an increase in spending, which seems counterintuitive if you're trying to balance this budget. But the main thing that's driving that is Medicaid. So the cost containments have to be focused on Medicaid, and these are going to be very controversial. There's going to be a lot of discussions about whether we're maintaining services for the people that are the least of these in our state. And this is very, very important. When you segment out Medicaid, I'm giving you the general picture here, the overall budget that's been recommended for us is down 6% over the current year in the first year. It's a minus 6%.
Reduction in spending.
Reduction, without Medicaid showing into it. So that gives you a little, it's about $1 billion, almost $1 billion less recommended spending than what we had last year. So that's just the first year. But in the Medicaid world, this budget was on a track to increase spending in Medicaid by $1.6 billion in the first year, next year, if nothing was done. The administration has trimmed that in a series of recommendations that we're going to look at very closely to about a $1 billion increase in spending. Now, there's federal money included in that, but it's a lot of money, and that's one of the cost containment areas that I wanted to start on and explain to people, because if you look at the total budget, you can get confused about, well, what's going on here in terms of the spending.
Medicaid's a big part of this.
Very big.
Local governments. How are local governments? There are partners, as you say, in government services in Ohio. How are local governments affected by this budget proposal?
Well, in many, many ways. They run a lot of the Medicaid programs, and our local community partners are very affected by the Medicaid program, as an example. So how that is structured makes a big difference to our hospitals, who have a big stake in providing Medicaid services and pay a lot of assessments that are then used to bring down federal money, and it gets complicated. But that's an example. Local governments are going to be affected a lot. And let me give you an example of a proposal that we have in front of us. The state has been sending money back to our local communities, schools, and to county governments and all our local partners that have tax levies to replace a tax that was repealed, a local tax, that was very onerous on our ability to sustain and create jobs in Ohio, the tangible personal property tax. That replacement funding is being proposed to scale down at 2% of their total budget, not just the share given to them per year, up to 2% until it's gone over a period of years. That's a pretty significant sharing in the pain of the local governments, as an example. There's also a thing called the Local Government Fund, which is a sharing of state revenues back to local governments as well. And that doesn't go to schools, but it goes to county governments and to townships and municipalities. That's proposed to be dropped by 25% this next year, and then another 25% the year after that. For some entities, that's 5 or 10% of their budget. In some cases, it could be as high as 20 or 25% of their budget is this local government fund. So that's a pretty big drop. Libraries, who have been seeing a decline in their state revenue and are heavily funded by the state, primarily funded by the state, are recommended for a 5% reduction in the state assistance to them each of the next 2 years. So it's a smaller percentage, but it's a big part of their budget, so that will be difficult.
Okay. Medicaid, local government issues, what else?
Well, there are many domains. I touched on prison reform. I'm not going to go into that now, but there is a strong set of proposals that have been under construction, actually, in the General Assembly for several years, that would attempt to move individuals who are typically serving less than a year in the state prison system into community correctional systems, where their penalties and their rehabilitation is going to be focused at the community level with the safety. These are not violent criminals typically. A lot of them are drug-related kinds of problems. And so that's a big area that we need to look at very closely. There's a whole other range of service efficiencies that are very important that we should look at as well if we have a couple more minutes to talk about, because this is very big and very important. Some of the shared services that are being proposed in the budget are big.
Right. Well, I tell you, we are going to move into a related topic. We got another 10 minutes or so left here. How about Senate Bill 5?
All right.
As if the budget bill wasn't interesting enough.
All right.
We've completed, you have completed work on Senate Bill 5. How about maybe just let's explain what this bill is for people. There's
Sure.
a lot of information going on out there, accurate, inaccurate, a lot of passion and emotion.
That's right.
Let's just talk about what the bill is about.
Sure. Well, in very broad terms, Senate Bill 5 is a change in the rules of engagement for how employers and employees in the governmental sectors of Ohio work together. That's what it's about. And that's part of the reason it's created a lot of emotion. I'm one of the few members of the General Assembly that was actually serving in 1983 when the civil service laws that had been in place for many years were left in place, but on top of that, a very controversial set of rules were put in place in 1983 that have been tolling and playing ever since. And as we've seen them play out, it has become very clear that it has made it very difficult for many of our governmental agencies to manage their costs and their work rules and how they deploy their workforce to provide service. Now, having said that, if I could, I don't think it's going to be as big an issue in Wayne County because Wayne County has had a good history of employees and employers working together. But on the other hand, costs have gone up in ways that probably need to be moderated now if we're going to continue to be able to balance our budgets at the local level, and the state has the same issue. There are other parts of the state where costs have gone out of control, and it's very unfortunate. There's no guarantee when you have local management, and we have that in Ohio, that these things will right themselves over time. But the changes that were made in Senate Bill 5 are designed to level the playing field and make it easier for the taxpayers through their elected leaders to manage costs.
Will current state public sector employees, state, local, still have the right to collectively bargain?
Absolutely. Now, collective bargaining is an artificial construct that was added in the government area as a means of bringing the employers and the employees together in a pretty formal way to work out their differences on how they're paid and so on. But that will continue under what's been proposed. This is not a repeal of collective bargaining at all, although it'll probably be on the ballot to see whether these changes are going to stick. So we'll have a lot more conversation about that as the year progresses.
Why this legislation at this time in our history?
Well, I explained the fact that we have a lot of budget problems in Ohio, and we're no different than any other state in terms of budget issues. We've got to realign our expectations that we have for service and our ability to pay for those. And that's a very, very difficult area to be in. We typically 85% of an operating budget in government is people, because they are the asset that provides the service. They're our front line. And so that's a very important part, but it's also the major cost associated with delivering, whether it's in the classroom or at the bedside in a hospital or out on the street in a cruiser. These are very important services that are critical to people, but we need to do them in ways that are fair and that value them, but also show a responsibility with the resources that we have.
Right. And our final question here, we're talking about people, and that's important. Could you just share your thoughts on the importance of a good working relationship between our employees, our elected officials? What is that? What makes a healthy environment?
Absolutely. This is foundational to effective government, and to have effective government, there has to be trust, there has to be respect, both on the part of the leaders and on the part of the employees. That has to be developed. And one of the things that was in Senate Bill 5 that was actually my amendment was a new initiative with a commission that's totally focused on the best practices for good employee-employer relationships. So that's a seed that's planted. We have to nurture it and try to develop it into something that's helpful to our state going forward. But we really need to move in that direction. That's held Ohio back for many years, this strife between the workers and their employers. That weakens our state, and our state needs to work at getting stronger.
Well, I cheated. One more question.
Oh, all right.
This doesn't end here with the passage and signing of this bill. Would you not agree that now comes the time where we explain and work together to make this happen?
Well, there's a lot of contentious debate that went on in this bill, and frankly, it got off to a rocky start. It could have, I think, been handled better in its early stages. But I think the House made a lot of changes to the bill, and I think if we explain what we're trying to do here, we'll see what the voters want to do with this. It probably will be on the November ballot, and I think there'll be a lot of people throwing a lot of messages around, and hopefully folks will look to, well, what are the facts, and how are these things actually likely to play out through our elected officials who are going to be administering it? That's the real question that we have to work with. There's been a lot of fear and, frankly, untruth that's been told to some really good employees, and that's really caused a lot of concern that I think is very unfortunate. But I do believe that we can work together. We have to. If we really, I know many people care about the delivering service that's good, and they're willing to work hard. And those are the folks that need to be rewarded and encouraged, and we need to bring others that are more fearful and into the team.
Our time here has run down, but
right.
You have a website people could go to for further research and...
Yes, it's very simple, www.amstutz.org, A-M-S-T-U-T-Z.
.org.
.org. Well, that's my website.
Thank you, Representative Amstutz, for sharing with us today. It's been a pleasure. You've been watching Ohio in Focus, the program that brings state government to you. I'm Dustin Russell. Thank you for joining us.